Good evening, members of the House. I declare this the 21st ordinary meeting of the 175th session duly constituted and call upon the Secretary to read the minutes from the last meeting.
I don't want to be here. Thank you, Rory. So, is this actually going to be an actual photo, or like all the ones that are just blackness and you're like earlier in the week?
Make sure your finger's not in front of the lens.
Anyways, last week the Society met for the 20th session of the 175th session of the Literary and Scientific Society, but it wasn't for a normal debate. Mr. President Toft began by introducing the motion and the Friends of the British Overseas Territory, or football.
Ball.
I'm going to call them football. Anyways, explaining its scope and interests. In addition, he introduced the Imagine Festival, whatever that is, which he thanked for helping make the debate. He introduced football Chief Executive Philip Smith, who came in and made his own remarks. Mr. Smith began by welcoming everyone, including representatives from the Chagos Islands. They will become important later on. Indeed, he probably welcomed about half the population of the islands at the end of the day. He thanked the Literific for hosting the event, and he noted the importance of historical and contemporary issues and context within this debate. He stressed that the British Overseas Territories represent a diverse array of territories with their own various conditions and cultures. He argued that these territories are often misunderstood by politicians and Dermot Hamill and the public at large. From this he explained the reasons for the founding of football. He emphasised the importance of working with the charity in this area. He then introduced everyone, most importantly somebody involved with something called Town and Country, which was not Tom Burns. And then he mentioned somebody being from the city of Bangor. And then he introduced some person called Tulta, not sure who that was, and didn't get their surname either. Mr. President Toft then came back to the lectern and explained the rules before setting out the vote in prior opinion. On the question at hand, there were 31 ayes, 4 nays, and 10 abstentions, of which a significant proportion of that was the population of the Chagos Islands. First in the proposition was Stephen Dawes. He argued that it was wrong to give away the freedoms of citizens of these territories, pointing to the example of Hong Kong. The UK is a nation, shock, that focuses on the environment. He noted that the issues of the territorial integrity and autonomy are important, which are integral issues. He then raised the issues of Gibraltar, the Falkland Islands, referendums, before quoting the importance of defending principles and sacrifice. And then he decided to go and quote poetry from the great poetical work, The Dangerous Book for Boys. He then argued that we must, like St. Peter gesturing up to the painting behind all of us there, give our lives to fight for the Chagos Islands. In the background, the ominous sound of shaking cutlery could be heard. First in the opposition was Tulta McSparren, whose name was written phonetically on the page so that our guest chair could actually say it correctly. She began by casting our minds back to the glorious days of 2016, when half of Hollywood were dying. Why is Britain so silly as a nation, she asked. She argued that the UK clings on to nostalgia, comparing them to somebody and arguing that Britain is going to die alone and in pain and looking into its own reflection. Hi, Rory. Then she quoted the scholastic philosopher Carly Simon on the issue of vanity. Corruption and tax avoidance exist, and they exist in the British Overseas Territories. Then she mentioned tax havens. At this point, Kira laughed extremely loud. This results in the loss of money. Quote, "It's like Britain has a giant neon sign that says tax haven this way." End quote. Money stays at the top. Russia was then mentioned, and she then mentioned the Bermuda Triangle without mentioning Barry Manilow, and then said how much money was lost. The ominous sound of the shaking cutlery became even louder at this point. Second on the proposition was Peter Martin. Security and biodiversity are the most important parts of the UK. He then brought up Diego Garcia and the importance of security and defence against foreign powers, and that China is going to expand up to the Suez Canal. Ascension Island is important, and then he decided just to give us a run through of every possible overseas territory that existed. And I'm not going to go through it all, but there was comments such as the fact that Britain plays a great role with UN peacekeepers in Cyprus, which helps keep peace in the Middle East. Tom Burns then dealt with the shaking cutlery. Second in the opposition was Max Kieran, regretfully. He focused on the issue of self-determination and maintaining bases, then proceeded to just argue against self-determination for the next 7 minutes. To stand against democracy and freedom is what he was not wanting to do, but it did sound like he was doing that. Then brought up examples of the Falkland Islands having no seats in Parliament and their currencies not being recognised. He then seemed to argue that Germany is not a real democracy or unified due to the presence of British troops there. So true. Then, integrating these territories into the UK or independence are the only two issues, and not keeping the status quo, which was brought up by a lot of other people. Their currencies are not sustainable at all and will burst at some point. The UK and they deserve to be recognised as such. The ominous sound then returned briefly. Third in the proposition was Robert Midgley. This was the first time he had debated in a long time since school. Quote, "The Falklands is not a tax haven, though it does have a lot of sheep," end quote. He focused on history, noting that the territories shift over time and not a real argument. The people there may want to removal of the British? No. All referendums showed a strong support in keeping their links with London. The status quo was popular. He didn't believe the Falklands or Bermuda want their own seats in Parliament, and then he brought up the issue of Hong Kong, which was involuntarily handed over to China, and freedom suffered. He then quoted Mrs. Thatcher, somewhere Jack Steele has gotten incredibly roused, thought of that, and then said that the overseas territory are as British as Finchley, and probably more British than the Narge Road on the 12, apparently. These territories are loyal to the king and country, and they have a democratic right to remain so. If you do disagree with the proposition, you're a communist or a fascist. Oh. No. Well, I mean, you are disagreeing with the proposition tonight, so, I mean, which of those are you? Anyways, third in the opposition was Ciara Swale, HLM. She decided to do something really sexy and talked about tax. Feck. Now she began by discussing tax evasion and tax avoidance. One's illegal, the other's legal. We all know this from about the age of about 6, but anyways, British overseas territories account for about a sixth of tax avoidance, with the British Virgin Islands coming top of the list. There was a lot of money lost. A lot of money lost. Then Ciara asked a question and said she would come back to it later on. Then she didn't. Something she's complained about for many years.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Anyways, I'm doing the minutes here, and talking about the 4 minutes and tax codes, she then decided to come to the crux of her argument and argue that there's a growing movement to tackle tax havens and avoidance. Then something about AML figures and high-risk banking and terrorists, I don't know. Last of the proposition was Jack Steele. He ran up to the podium excited. He began by starting rebuttals. Quote, "I'm sorry you want higher taxes, Tulsha, that's your problem," end quote. Max Kieran was, quote, "an arrogant bad boy," end quote. Quote, "We can make up a mess of ourselves." And then he decided to quote Nigel Farage on overseas territories and then financial policies. The UK helps fund financial systems overseas. Dermot Hamill then asked a POI, to which the response was, quote, "No, go away, you silly little man." He then used big words to express his anger that people's identities could be questioned or queried. Quote, "My passion for Lady Thatcher is perhaps my strongest and only driving passion," end quote. He then proposed that Mrs. Thatcher was in place due to divine providence and helped to defend the sovereignty of those islands. And he wasn't there to tell us what to do, but he was. People, quote, "allegedly vote," and then he professed himself to be a Democrat, not that kind, and the importance of voting. And then he said, "We must affirm a national choice," really loudly, and I've written that in all capitals. But he said he was being calm while shouting. Last for the opposition was Dermot Hamill, HLM. He then crossed himself before going up. By the way, I got hauled up to HR at work for doing that, and that's another whole story. But anyways, quote, "Right," end quote. He then welcomed the guests. This is more important later on. He then branded Jack a polemicist. Jack asked repeated questions which were constantly refused. He then expressed that he wants to join the charity but doesn't want to pay £20 and he wants to be on the other side of the debate. Shock horror, he actually did pay the £20 and is actually, I believe, a member now of the charity. Anyways, he then began with rebuttals. Focusing on Jack, he argued the overseas territories can't have their cake and eat it. The proposition are held in a faux state of empire. And then he focused on the circular logic of the proposition that they want to defend the overseas territories, but in order to defend the overseas territories, you must defend the overseas territories by having defence there. I don't know. Anyways, at this point I just wanted more wine. He then promoted peace around the rest of the world, then he discussed Brexit, and then he apologised to the population of the Chagos Islands because his whole speech was meant to be about them, not realising that half the island was actually going to be in attendance in the debate. If you vote for the opposition, you have humanity, he argued. Then questions were heard from half the island of the Chagos Islands, and at this point, Dermot Hamill lost a lot of his blood in his face. Then a vote in speakerability occurred. There were 21 votes for the proposition, 17 for the opposition, and 3 abstentions. Thus, the proposition had it. President Hall thanked everyone for attending and made some concluding remarks. After this, everybody started to go get drinks. However, 3 people, myself, Tom Burns and President Emeritus McCormick decided to go on walksies. We ended up in the Canada room, and he saw an open door, and President McCormick walked through the door, proceeding to deadlock it behind him, and thus he was stuck in the upstairs balcony there. He did what any normal person did and went to the toilet and did a massive you-know-what on the toilet. Then a security guard walked in and said, "Get out of there, boy," and told him to open, and then let him free. I don't know what happened, but that did happen, and with that, the debate ended. Can I take the minutes as read?
Aye. Thank you for that, James. Welcome to the 21st ordinary meeting of the 175th session for the motion "This House believes classics are classist." This motion this evening is in collaboration with the Queen's English Society, so thank you to them for helping us organise and put forward speakers this evening. Before we get into the order of business, we'll move to council announcements, although I'm not sure there actually will be any. Does anyone have any council announcements?
Any council members here?
3? 4? No? Okay, right. Interesting. Okay, we'll move on to private members' business, which is the section of the debate. You can raise anything you are interested in and wish to discuss or want to put before the House. Do we have any pieces of private members' business, please? Mr. Warren?
I'm not quite sure if this was kind of relevant or relevant last week or this week, but Fine Gael decided it would be a brilliant idea to voice yet another leader on everyone, and kind of it's most likely that barring some sort of natural disaster, Simon Harris will be the next Taoiseach. I just want to get the House's thoughts on this particular appointment and how they see the impacts of this further down the line for the next Irish general election.
No?
This is going to be a rare compliment to Rishi Sunak. It is related, but I've never heard of it. And then when I saw a few clips on him talking about business, I thought, holy shit, there is someone in the world who is less charismatic than Rishi Sunak. So I'm pointing the Tories for that.
Hugh, anyone else on this? Tom?
I think it's kind of interesting to see in time what people see Leo Varadkar's legacy. Sort of internally and then externally. So I think sort of outside of Ireland, he's seen this sort of this great modernising Taoiseach that was, you know, the son of immigrants, was openly gay, was sort of helped modernise and bring Ireland to the 21st century. And inside Ireland, he's seen sort of like continue to make the economy attractive for the market and not good for anybody. I think sort of in the next few years, we're going to cricket then maybe once Simon Harris is dead and station and Eagles, what people will be thinking, what they're actually will do.
Hugh, James, and then we'll go to Max.
A few points here. On Simon Harris, I don't think anyone can really say what he believes in. When he was elected the first time, he was on the Christian right Fine Gael, then he decided no, and then was on the Progressive Left Party, and has now decided he wants to be the Law and Order Right Party. I'm not sure, maybe by the time he's Taoiseach, maybe he'll be a communist. I don't know.
Sounds like you're a Tory student.
And another point I would have to say is last week I got, much earlier in the week, Mr. Sam Hazlett informed me of a very high level source of his within Fine Gael. It may be known to some of us here as formerly of this parish, given his accurate prediction of the next Irish election, which he argued that Sinn Féin would lose seats and that it would be a snap election after that, which would result in Fine Gael landslide victory. Now, I'm not a betting man, but I'm going to say don't bet on that. I suppose, I would say, I mean, I'm just going to say I don't think Fine Gael is on track to win a landslide victory, but it did feel really great watching the Varadkar lose to the referendum.
You, Max?
Oh, mine was a new piece of business.
Okay, we can go on to that. Oh, fine, we'll go to Ryan and then we'll go on to your new piece.
It'd be interesting, I'm only interjecting this, it'd be interesting to see what the new Taoiseach's relationship is with the parties up here. Because obviously Leo Varadkar became somewhat of a hate figure amongst the PUL political representatives and lots of the grassroots sort of loyalist campaign against the protocol that you have all Leo Varadkar plastered on everything. And then when Micheál Martin became Taoiseach, he had somewhat of a better relationship with unionists, which is odd considering that the parties down south, Fine Gael generally throughout history has been more aligned to the UK than Fianna Fáil would have been. So it'd be interesting to see what Simon Harris, is that his name? That's his name, isn't it? It'd be interesting to see what his relationship is with us up here.
You got any new pieces? Okay, fine, James.
One thing I've forgotten to say before is the last Irish election was called because Simon Harris was so monumentally incompetent as health minister that Fianna Fáil and the Greens demanded an early election. Now I have a coalition with him and I say he's the best man for the job. Now I know Micheál Martin doesn't have any values whatsoever, but this sort of is the icing on the cake that
Is it on this?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, all I'll say is that the principle of democratic responsibility sometimes requires the occasional human sacrifice.
Okay, we'll move on to the next piece of practice. Matt.
Right, so the United States has gone to court again. Now, not against, the guy who tried to start an insurrection, but this time, almost more monumentally, it's now United States v. Apple for monopoly law. So they finally put together a case to the federal government to say that Apple has monopolized the smartphone market. And if it goes through, it means Apple has to release pretty much all the details about how they run iMessenger, all their products, right to repair, and actually make better products overall. So I'm wondering what the House feels about possibly the biggest monopoly case this side of the 21st century.
Jacqueline?
I mean, these guys called Louis Rossman on YouTube have been talking shit about Apple's whole anti-right to repair thing for ages. And I mean, the EU has already bullied Apple into making sure that they're going to have to put in the same charges everyone else seems. So I think it's good. I think, if anything, the US should have done that before the EU, but, better late than never.
What's this, Hugh?
I don't know why Apple's around monopoly, they're just inside the box, we get it.
Anyone else? Hugh, Max?
But Monopoly is a terrible game. Like,
Wrong.
it's genuinely bad.
Quiet, please.
No strategy.
Nala.
Sorry, everyone get jail free.
Nala.
Of all of the things on the agenda in the United States, yeah, sure, trust busting, great, all for it. There's
1900.
sure there's bigger problems though. I don't really care if the United States goes towards Apple.
Ray?
This is a question for Mark Kieran. What is your monopoly strategy?
Oh, you see, I've not played Monopoly since I was that's what 7.
Thank you. We'll go to James.
Now, this isn't actually a really related stuff, but when you look at game and strategy and marine expand, I'd like to bring up a little anecdote about Rory. Is that one time I went out for lunch with him and he played chess on his iPad the whole time. Rory's strategy, the best way I can describe it, is sort of like the first day of his Battle of the Somme, where he will sacrifice every high-value piece to keep the cause. But the thing is, he actually won most of the matches, which is all the more impressive. I just want to get that on record that Rory is a brilliant chess player.
Do we have any more piece of private members' business that isn't chess or Monopoly? Ben?
Mr. President, I'd like to ask, are there any actual members of the English Society here?
Are you regretting being here?
You're about to.
Rory?
Oh no, I was saying I was a member of that.
Oh, you can. Do you do English?
What?
Do you do English?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Do we have any more piece of private members' business before we move on? There being none, we shall move on. Before we get to the debate, we'll move to President's questions, which I would like to remind the House I'm constitutionally obliged to do and don't actually want to. So please fire away. Rory.
What is your monopoly strategy?
Well, actually, Rory, I haven't played Monopoly since I was 7, so I just like being a little top hat. Because it fits nicely, Any more before we move on? Calvin. Sorry, President Emeritus Calvin Black HLM. Sorry, apologies.
Am I, first of all, am I permitted to stand? We should stand.
Of course.
Not be sure how the role of the president to stand or something. Yes, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you, Mr. President, on what I believe, as someone who joined the Society 11 years ago, is the best ever post-conversazione turnout of the debate that I think I've ever seen. I think it's the whole way how it's divided. I'd also like to remark that personally, I find this level of attendance at debates delightful. No, honestly, I really do, because it's so much just more chill. I find that's subjective. But also, to move to my actual question, I note with great pleasure you're a more casual attire this evening. Can the House, on occasion, I think it's nice that the President feel comfortable to relax a bit. Can the House assume that you're setting a trajectory here, and that by the time of the final bit of the semester you will be wearing, say, some sort of vest, a backward baseball cap, and sunglasses? I, for one, would support such a thing.
Absolutely not. The next debate I'll be returning to a suit. I just didn't have any clean white shirts after our diplomatic excursion to Dublin yesterday. My last one got incredibly dirty, but I will be back in a suit next time, so apologies for...
So we're not having more
We're not, no. We'll go to Grant and then Max.
Just following on from President Harris' black kind of question about the trajectory of your sartorial code, shall we say.
God.
You're not intending on kind of emulating the octopus affair at any stage by the end of this session.
Do you have any more questions?
What's your favourite flavour, Chris?
Prawn cocktail. Any others before we move on? Please stop. Okay, fine. Last one, and then we're going to... So now, before we... Okay, one final one.
You mentioned... No, soon though. Or at least President Neutrality can't comment. You mentioned your diplomatic excursion.
Yes.
Are you able to disclose the details of anything that happened with the society, or is it still too early to say?
Yes, so no.
It would be very interesting.
The diplomatic excursion was myself, Ryan and Jack. Although we went down to Dublin yesterday, we spent the day in Dublin and went to the HIS debate in the evening, and was talking to the auditor and the vice treasurer or vice auditor, or whoever is second in command there. After maybe some rocky relations between the Literific and the HIS culminating in recent events, we thought maybe it would be best to go down there and to get talking to them and hope to kind of see that they're there and try and repair relations somewhat, which was, I would say, a successful attempt. Before we went in to the debate, I did say to Jack, Ryan had gone somewhere, but I did say to Jack, please don't mention we were sat in a private members club beforehand, because it's not the best for you. Jack followed the line, and just that we had business in Dublin, the business being going to Ryan's reciprocal club. Then Ryan comes in and we're sort of talking, and Ryan comes barging in and declares that we've just been at the Stephen's Green Club, which did not look the best, which did set our diplomatic relations back a little bit, but I can forgive him for taking us for such a nice day out.
Was it the Hibernians Club?
Yes.
Surprising for him.
Yes. But we're gonna... Oh, God. Yes.
You didn't mention anything about what the debate was actually on, or who the guest speaker was at the debate.
Now, before we welcome the first speaker, I'm just going to run through the list of the rules for the evening. A full list of the rules can be found through our standing orders on our website, but just for now. Each speech is 7 minutes long, with the first and last minute being protected time. The end of the first minute of protected time and the start of the final minute of the speech will be signalled by the bell, which means you can only offer points of information in the middle 5 minutes. Thank you. To POI, raise your hand and say point of information on that point, or simply POI. Please keep your POIs to 10 seconds long, and no barracking, meaning wait at least 15 seconds after either you or another member has offered a POI. Once you've made your POI, you cannot go back and forth with the speaker, and I'd just like to emphasise the 10-second rule for POIs, Kira.
I'm saying people also when people
If you need to leave the room at any time, do so quietly between speeches. Do not leave or re-enter whilst the speaker is speaking, and remember, noise from outside travels in. Lastly, no swearing. If a speaker swears, they will be fined a bottle of port to be presented to myself at the next ordinary meeting. Without further ado, can we welcome the first member? For God's sake, not swear words. We'll go to the vote of prior opinion, which is weirdly not on this list. The motion being, this House believes classics are classist. If you'd like to vote in favour of the motion, please raise your hand now. Thank you, Ryan.
Let's just go to Lavery's, we all agree, it's not classist.
Harris Whale, a language student.
Harris Whale, professional.
If you'd like to vote against the motion, please raise your hand now.
This is arguably worse than retains the overseas territories.
It is.
Yeah, it is. And they were charity destined for retaining the overseas territories.
And if you... James, you got that. And if you'd like to abstain on the motion, please raise your hand now. See, there's still a chance to convince people.
No, it looks like there's more people in the room regardless.
6. Thank you. Can we get the vote on prior opinion, please, Mr. Orchin?
Yes, on this high turnout, much like the Westminster election here, there was one vote for proposition, 13 for the opposition, and 6 abstentions, thus by sort of a Liverpool margin. The opposition has it.
Thank you. Now we can move on to the debate. First to open for the proposition, Mr. Tom Burns.
Thank you.
I would not put your last one.
We're going to see how we go. It can't get any worse in the vote, so let's see. It does feel very futile all of a sudden. Mr. President, members of the opposition, members of the House, Rory with the camera. As we all gather, the few of us that are here tonight, in the oldest society in Queens, with the President wearing a robe, threatening fines at port and flouncing around with one of the names of all time in the literary and scientific society, I stand before you, a humble-ish man with a funny accent, some notions on the point on who you ask, Rory, an English degree, to argue that classics are indeed classes. For the purpose of the debate, we argue that classics, the proposition define classics as works of classical literature, generally those, the great and good of the 19th, maybe 20th century, those novels, that like kind of books that you pretend you've read when people ask, because it's better than saying that despite as good as it is, The Muppets Christmas Carol is the only Dickens you're aware of. My argument has sort of 3 main points. First, that the classics were originally written for a wealthy, out-of-touch audience. Second, that because of this, no matter what subject matter, they generally were adapted to suit these sensibilities to an extent. And third, both of these come together to create an enclosed, hard-to-reach world, except for those who are already in it. This does not, however, negate from their quality, nor for their longevity, but is an important point to note when thinking about them.
On that point.
Not yet. In 1830, let me take you back, a dark time, 2 decades before the establishment of this great society, Charles Dickens wrote his first major success, the Pickwick Papers. Dickens himself did have a difficult upbringing. When he was 12, his father was put into debtor's prison, forcing a young Dickens to work in a workhouse. Many of his experiences of his own childhood and of his life can be found within many of his works. However, in that time, in the early 19th century, literacy rates were extremely low. About 40% of men, 60% of women at the time were illiterate. The publishing industry was booming, novels were hugely popular, but the ability to read and to enjoy them were the privilege mainly of the upper classes. Working class people growing up in the difficulty of Victorian England often had neither the income nor the ability to purchase or to read these books. It was a luxury of the wealthy to be able to take time to promenade around the gardens and the roads and take a seat on a bench and flick through the newest release.
On that point?
Yeah.
Just because these texts were primarily being read by people who were upper class upbringings doesn't mean these books can't still champion the values of working class people.
I kind of get to that point later on. It feeds into my second point, which is that because they're read by these people, eventually they're sort of edited somewhat to sort of better favour their sensibilities, but we'll kind of explain that more later. I think though this concept is still something which broadly rings true today. In the modern world of the arts, one that rests on the shoulders of this period of art, born out of this great explosion of creation of the 19th century, often this feels very inaccessible to people who aren't already in it, to the working classes and lower classes who aren't part of this world. It's an industry completely dominated by Oxbridge graduates, nepo babies, and those with a silver spoon lodged firmly in between their teeth. While many actors and writers and artists, indeed some of the very, very best that we have come from working class backgrounds, the arts remain firmly in the hands of the very, very wealthy. A few years ago, in an interview in America, somewhere actor James McAvoy spoke of the class ceiling in the arts in Britain, one that still exists today, beginning in and growing through this 19th and 20th century period in which these works were written. This room is so echoey whenever it's empty, my God. At this point, I'm going to talk a little bit about Saltburn, but not those bits, so it's okay. Emerald Fennell, the director, herself an Oxford graduate, came under criticism for Barry Keoghan's character, again, not for those bits, but for what one critic who watched the film called it a film that confidently, quote, demarcates the middle classes as the true villains of Great Britain, untrustworthy and covetous social climbers. In Saltburn's universe, there is no greater sin than bourgeois aspiration, end quote. Fennell herself has often spoken about the works like Brideshead Revisited, The Go-Between and Rebecca as inspirations for this film. Now these books, some of the most famous of their genre, centre around the glories of class, the wealth and the excess, and a lot of that still bleeds into modern day literature, film and TV. The influence of those upper classes cannot be negated here. So to move on to my second point then, that no matter what the subject matter of these great works of classical literature, when written for an audience of upper class people, the works will in some ways reflect the sensibilities, ideas and beliefs of these groups. Now, having spent 4 long and tiring years in critical academia, not studying a not English degree, I have learned the importance of reading something with the intended audience in mind. What effects does this have on the work, how characters are portrayed, how landscape and setting is described, how the novel itself is put together. So imagine that you're an author in the 1820s. You're writing your novel, it's coming along pretty well. It's a biting critique of power and the class structures that have subjugated and oppressed millions for years. You can't wait to have this magnum opus, this fiery polemic of moral rightness published, and for those oppressed peoples to read it, realise their fate, and finally call sweet, sweet class warfare. Until you realise, yeah, okay.
Yeah, to use Dickens as an example, who's famous for bringing these issues to the forefront in his work, including workhouses, etc., and is actually praised for being one of the first people to do so.
Yeah, again, I kind of do come to this again later on as well, which is that I think to an extent, because these are being written for a certain audience, they're still marketed to that audience. I think it's almost inevitable that some of the parts of these stories are slightly exaggerated or embellished to try and sort of better appeal to those people, because at the end of the day, he still has to sell books. As great as an artist as he was, he still has to sell books to make his living. And so a lot of the content, I believe, would have been changed for it. I think it could be implicit or explicit. It's probably realistically more likely to be the former. I do think, though, it's almost inevitable that does happen. A lot of it will be over-dramatised to make them more palatable to the people that want to read them, who have to read them, who can read them. But even away from those kind of books, whenever I was writing this speech, I looked up a list of the greatest books of all time, and I found a list called The Greatest Books of All Time. So let's go through some of the list of the greatest books of all time. Number 1, 100 Years of Solitude, a novel about a family who owned a townland, founded and owned a townland. The Great Gatsby, a novel focused on millionaires and their excesses. We'll come back to this one later. Pride and Prejudice, a novel about a well-to-do family and the landed gentry. Anna Karenina, a novel about high society Russia. The first time we hit what I would consider a narrative that wasn't circling purely around the higher classes was number 26 on that list, where we find The Incredible Beloved by Toni Morrison, and everyone should read that if they haven't. No thanks, I've got a lot to get through, sorry, Grant. If you want to argue the satirical nature of the 25 before that and all the ones that come after, they all still revolve around those classes. Gatsby is a good example of this, a novel which warns against the greed and excess of the Roaring Twenties and shines a light on the corrupting nature of wealth and power. But if you ask most people about Gatsby, they'll tell you about the beauty and the glitz and the glamour of the Roaring Twenties, of Jay and Daisy, of Jordan and of Tom Buchanan, of how much fun the whole thing looked. It's why so many Gatsby-themed parties are bright and golden and full of music and drink, and why no one ends up dead in a road traffic collision at the end.
On that point.
Protected time. The issue with subtle satire is that it's hard to spot, and the inaccessibility of this type of classical literature makes it even harder still. So to conclude, the original intended audience and their expectations conspire together, I believe, to create works that are inaccessible, creating a caricature of class and continuing to propagate a system where the restrictive structures of social immobility confine and condemn most people to their lives as they already stand. The great works of classical literature are a manifestation of this, and through this can be seen as nothing but classist. I propose this motion.
The opposition is Zach Savage.
Mr. Secretary, everybody else, and lack thereof,
It's first worth defining what exactly we mean by the classics and classist in this debate. For the former, the Western literary canon springs to mind, which you may associate with those stuffy, obtuse Victorian books you did not read in GCSE or A-level English, or the plays of Shakespeare about kings, nobles, and powerful families and their politics. It may also include the philosophical teachings of the ancient Greeks and their elites like Socrates. When I invoke these images, it's not unreasonable to assume at a glance that these texts must be unconcerned with the effects of inequality between classes, or are classist. After all, the societies they were written in, to a greater extent than our own today, certainly were. And in fairness, the literary canon is massive, and I won't deny, in some aspects, its gatekeeping. The overwhelming majority of classics were written by white, male, well-to-do writers, which will hopefully change when the books of today become classics of the future. But to dismiss the current literary canon as classist for the flaws of some risks tarnishing the reputation of some of the greatest and most iconic works ever written in the English language. From authors who champion the rights of the working class and other marginalised groups. Exhibit A, the Greeks. Socrates himself was famous for a Socratic method of teaching, an interrogative style which forced pupils to come to their own conclusions as opposed to prescribed correct opinions, which may have been favoured by ruling classes. In his most famous work, The Republic, he advocated universal education for both boys and girls equally and without regard to social caste. Exhibit B, Shakespeare, who, while writing for the monarchs of his day, still managed to appeal massively to the working classes, featuring huge turnouts of less well-off people at his plays. He did this by featuring labour or peasant characters. Yes?
Many of those working class people were stuck at the bottom in the pits, standing in the mud, while the middle class is sat sort of higher up, sort of nice, tidy, clean, warm stuff.
I think that's more a flaw of the theatre design than Shakespeare's actual quality of plays. He did this by featuring labour or peasant characters in prominent and compelling roles, with an entire character archetype coined because it recurred so frequently in his works, named the Shakespearean Fool, which consists of clever, lower-class commoners who use their wit to outsmart those of higher social standings. By some counts, there are as many as 27 of these characters who appear across his 38 plays. Exhibit C, Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, which essentially tells the revenge story of Heathcliff, an outcast in his community, spurned by the love of his life who marries a higher status man for wealth and social benefit. Relentlessly weaponizing the Victorian legal and current cultural values, which originally demonized him to acquire land and wealth beyond his perceived status, elevating himself to being a gentleman with plenty of patience and determination. Is he a villain? Perhaps. But also a byproduct of the class hierarchy that forced him into the person he became. In a very valid interpretation, the farm labourer turned landlord exposes and pushes back against the repressive Victorian values of his day. And lastly, Exhibit D, Charles Dickens. As Thomas said, his father having went to jail for debt, and Dickens himself having spent time shining shoes to pay for his release, Dickens never lost sympathy for the working classes as he himself became richer and more famous. His novels and characters constantly championing the rights of those less well off, from Oliver Twist highlighting the injustices of orphanages of the day, workhouses and child labour laws, to Ebenezer Scrooge satirising the hollowness of excessive material wealth, showcasing moral wealth that can be gained from helping those in need when you're fortunate enough to be able to. His work served as political pressure pieces, forcing policy changes by attacking the values and beliefs of those in power. And in his personal life, he was a dedicated philanthropist, helping to fund and open an institution to help sex workers get off the street. The reformation of the tarnished image of prostitutes being a recurring feature in his works, via the characters of, say, Nancy and Oliver Twist, or Little Emily and David Copperfield, among others.
On that point?
Yes.
A lot of these exhibits you've given are focused on subject matter, representativity of the subject matter, as opposed to how they were received by audiences and the accessibility of class and the kind of implications of that for audiences. So where do you think that applies for every example you've given about Shakespeare, if that makes sense?
It's an interesting point because, as Thomas said before, it is very valid to say that most of the people reading sex in the time they were written probably weren't the audience that they're being championed for, but it's telling nonetheless that these writers are sticking their necks out for marginalised groups that didn't have a voice and making that stance for those who couldn't themselves. Many of these great classics have withstood the test of time, not in spite of the classist attitudes of the eras they were written in, but because of the way they contested those attitudes, presenting a wide range of themes, love, ambition, grief, which universally appeal to all people, regardless of their social classes. Crafting stories which are relevant to everybody, with a massive range of interpretations for every perspective, including, of course, the working classes. If so many of these iconic, influential, and important classics are fundamentally anti-classist in their content, then I strongly encourage you to vote for the opposition. Thank you.
And can I welcome Big C to continue the case for the proposition.
Better you.
Big C.
No. So today I'm here to talk about something very serious, something that's been on my mind. The politicians ignore it. The media kind of skirts away from the topic. Well, sometimes, you know, the Times might call him an immigrant, the Guardian might call him a refugee. He speaks with an RP accent, but I'm talking about Paddington Bear. Now, why does a bear from darkest Peru speak with a posh English accent? So yes, this says no. This is a serious political point about class and banal nationalism in Britain today. Why does a bear have this accent? Why is he's one of the good immigrants, I guess, he's posh. And so we need to talk about class. Class is not just another identity or lifestyle, whether you drink at Wetherspoons or the Reform Club, shop at M&S or Iceland, or from South Belfast or that strange little place called Newry. And I notice our strange little man from Newry isn't here tonight. Sure, go for it. Working class simply means you earn a living rather than being in a position of ownership or control. Working class is not the libelous fantasy that much of our media pretends. Yes, go ahead, Grant.
I was going to say that you're kind of smearing South Belfast there as a charity posh, and I must say there are in fact working class areas in South Belfast.
And those people are just as important as anyone else in Paddington Bear. And it is not, working class is not a homogeneously white group of northerners. It includes people all across the country and even those on very good money. Nevertheless, working class, middle class, upper class are all useful terms for understanding class distinctions in Britain today. In simplistic terms, class can be differentiated by looking at economic capital, money and assets as dictating your place in a social order. Therefore, the more capital you have, the more power you have. Now, how on earth can someone like David Beckham, with his hundreds of millions, call himself working class? It is naive to think that simply assets can be used to determine our apparent class. What our perception of class depends on is a cultural expression of a familiarity with the legitimate culture within a society, or what we would call high culture. That's why, you know, some of the media talks about music like grime music and all sort of a very different way than the opera. And this being families passing on cultural capital to their children, introducing them to dance and music, to theatre, galleries and historic sites, talking about literature and art over the dinner table. Within these realms, we can identify three distinct categories. The objective, which is your culture, books of art, books, classics. The embodied, language, mannerisms, preferences. This is why whenever you see people like Boris Johnson speaking on Latin on TV, it's not just a funny quirk, it's a very deliberate and sustained thing that's occurred. And all of these combine into qualifications and educational credentials. It's really no surprise then that, you know, if you look at, you know, many of our lecturers and people like that, that they all, nearly all of them are from those types of backgrounds. And let us talk about education now. In education, really, teachers and educators can really perceive a lot about their pupils. Here's a little story about Rory from his time in school. Our young blonde Robert De Niro, as he once called himself. Now, Rory wasn't always the best student. One time he forgot to do his homework, or, well, he left his book at home conveniently, and the teacher asked him, you know, where's your book? And he says, I think it's at home. And the teacher goes to him, where in the house do you think it is? Which is kind of an odd question. And Rory responds, and well, the teacher kind of changed her attitudes towards us after this. He goes, I think I left it on our grand piano. And so, oh, Jesus. Not an upright piano, our grand piano. Yes, James, go for it. James. We have a few things on our ground. I actually do sometimes leave books on top of it, but I don't live there anymore. I have an electric keyboard in my house, you know, man of the people and all that. So classics themselves are not classist, but the context in which society places them... No. But as the context in which society places them as a barrier weaponizes them to be. My handwriting's nearly as bad as Rory, so I'm struggling here. The class system is so vicious because we have allowed it to be so. Our socio-economic fate is in most cases determined by where you were born, which is why we still call people like David Beckham working class, but not his wife Victoria Beckham. And so access to the upper classes is restricted by higher culture, excluding those who are supposedly not becoming classical. No, thank you. Classics higher culture as a defining barrier to class mobility. How will the op respond to this? Will they suggest we live in a post-class social structure? And Noah said earlier that this debate of mine would be very Marxist stuff. Well, I didn't really go down that route. Instead, I will entertain you all with a post-structuralist critique. Never mind, Maxwell. You don't have grand piano, do you? Deconstruction is taking the text apart to understand the structure of the text as it was written. The basic notion of deconstruction can loosely be explained as when a text is produced, the author dies and the reader is born. This is, of course, a transformative process. And as we've let the upper classes weaponize classics, they can only be viewed through this lens. And that's classism, just in case you all forgot. And a number of years ago, one of my friends was telling me, we were talking about Pride and Prejudice, and he said to me he read the Pride and Prejudice, but with zombies. That's actually a thing. But I've been working on my own thing, and that's Pride and Prejudice with Kanye West. And Kanye says in it, oh, Jesus. I ain't saying Miss Bennett's a gold digger, but Mr. Blinley was certainly no broke fella. Thank you all for coming here.
Adam, to continue the case for the opposition.
Can I have that copy of Dime for a minute?
Mr. President, members of the proposition, fellow members of the opposition, and members of the House. I stand here today to oppose the motion, and I give a welcome to the English Society, who I'm here to represent, but since nobody else has said it. Anyway, classics refer to a lot of things, but in this instance I'm talking about classic literature, but classic literature is more than just what people think is modern classics or Shakespearean classics. It also includes a lot of, there's really, the way I'm dividing my speech up today is there's ancient Greek kind of type classics, then there's like Shakespearean era classics, and then there's modern classics. And they're all very different, but the best way to figure out if these are classist is to analyze them all. So to be classist, to discriminate on social classes is usually, but it can work both ways, but it's usually the rich looking down on the poor. And in a society like ancient Greece, this existed. This was the social structure that existed. But it exists, yes, but there's a fine line between a piece of work noting the existence or a piece of work sort of emphasizing that and glorifying the top or wealthiness or that type of thing. But I'll like to take you through a journey of literature here. So, for example, in Homer's The Odyssey, this fine line is quite well drawn because it's about King Odysseus coming home from the Trojan War, and it shows his bravery and resilience and kind of reflects the fact that he's this big hero. But I would argue that this is not because of his class, because there are many times where he meets many characters who are either of the same class or of a different class that are treated in various different ways, but this is because of their personalities, not because of their class. For example, when he comes home, he talks, the suitors who are, I don't know, I did not read The Odyssey, but I just know what happens in it. The suitors are the people that have taken over his house and his kingdom and are sort of, yeah, that's what happens there. But Homer looks beyond the social class of these because the suitors are essentially the same. They're wealthy people who live in the same place, and Homer kind of portrays them as the villain. And given that Odysseus and the suitors are of the same class, it doesn't glorify the upper class at all. It just sort of, it's more based on personality rather than the actual class. Moving on to Shakespeare. Shakespeare's a household name. Everybody knows, everybody's probably studied it in school. There's themes of love, tragedy, betrayal, pain, amongst many others that all humans identify with, not just people of a single class. To start with, Shakespeare wrote for the entertainment of the masses. His plays were available to attend to nearly everybody, with an entry fee of as little as 1 or 2 pennies for the the poor people, and obviously the higher classes could attend with higher prices and have better seats for whatever reason there. But love is a common theme in a lot of his plays. So, for example, Romeo and Juliet. As one of his famous plays, it tells the story of 2 wealthy families, same class, but they share a similar.
On that point?
Yes.
So you're trying to argue that it's not classes because it talks about universal themes. What are they supposed to talk about? They need to be in there. Like, you can't just go, no, we'll just have it be a blank page.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the classics themselves are not inherently classist because the themes are relatable to people of all different classes. So, therefore, they just can't be classist. For example, these feelings of love and the pursuit of love is, it transcends all social classes. Everybody is trying to do that, yes. And not to mention that a lot of the characters, so for example, Juliet sees characters of lower classes as sort of compassionately. So like the nurse, for example, she looks to her as a maternal figure, which is looking past the social class, and sees her as a guiding figure through the story and etc.
On that point.
Yes.
Is that not just kind of like ignoring and kind of romanticizing the kind of people of other classes? If it's a very centric experience, it's detailing the experiences of people from the upper class, as it were, then is that not just kind of denying the reality of people and kind of just almost tokenizing them, kind of making them look like a little bit of a novelty if they're looking at it's very from an upper class perspective?
Tokenizing, I would not say tokenizing. If the character is looking to somebody of a lower class for guidance and compassionately and showing that they care about them and that type of thing, I don't think that's tokenism. I think that's a genuine human interaction rather than an upper to lower class type of interaction there. But we'll move on to modern classics because I'm running out of time because I wrote far too much for this. But we'll talk about books like To Kill a Mockingbird, for example. It reflects a lot of passion that exists across all social classes. The story revolves around a black man that's accused of raping a white woman, and a respected lawyer who's represented as middle class takes on the case, and despite knowing that his career is on the line, he takes on the case to fight for injustice, and that's a real sort of human emotion there. It transcends social boundaries because he's putting his career on the line to amongst his white peers or amongst whoever to ensure that justice is served and that the voice of the black man is heard, because obviously this takes place in like the 1930s, so that's where that is. But yeah, I'm running out of time here, and I should have prepared for this better. But I would just like to say that Gatsby, for example, although it's perceived as classist and it does technically glorify class, or it glorifies wealth, you have to understand that his pursuit of wealth and his eccentric parties that he throws is because he's madly in love with one of the women in the story, and it ultimately his wealth is brought about by illegal means, and it just reflects the emptiness of wealth. And it's just like the pursuit of love is a theme that everybody can relate to, I feel. But
The proposition is Ben Wilson.
Ego sum Victoria. Members of the House, Mr. President, and notice I said members of the House. Had you had your classist classical education in the classics, you would have known how to address the House properly, Mr. Savage, I am sure, rather than this derogatory term everyone else. Indeed, I shall carry on. I must confess, Mr. President, you have, with all good conscience, placed me in a most difficult position this evening. Not to overstate the case, or to rather put too fine a point in it, but it is a rather difficult position. It is my incumbent responsibility to defend the position which is trying to maintain the decorum of this House, which is bound by society and bound, indeed, by your Constitution. Especially when given, and again, not to put too fine a point in it, the request I have been given by members to make remarks and arguments throughout this evening. Anyway. Welcome, my boy. Welcome. We should begin on. The main theme of this speech, the main theme, will be to close this off by saying, yes, they are classist. The classics are classist. And they fucking should be. Indeed, I believe whenever they talk about the true classics, because as everyone knows, the classical education is not only in the works of literature that maintain our culture and our fine appreciation of the arts and all our great society, but it is also in the foundational languages. They keep on talking of the Greeks, but as they had have known, if they had have actually had an education in the classics, they would have known that even our key phrases around the Greeks are truly in Latin. Indeed, the phrase that I'd like the House to remember for them is timeo danas et demo ferentes. Beware of Greeks bearing... Yes, thank you. No one knows how to truly pronounce Latin. It's a technicality because actually the language is quite dead. But anyway, indeed, actually the C's should actually be hard because actually, anyway, we won't get into that. That's a rabbit hole that we should not delve into. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. They bear you many gifts regarding the Greeks, but they want to skirt over the detail, the point. And that is, as Mr. McSparron so elegantly put, high culture. The key to government and the foundation of our democratic system. Government should be left in the hands of the right people. People who speak in the right sort of way. One of us. The good old sport. And an education in the classics to the right people provides them with this. Allowing, and as I go back to, it is the foundation of our democratic system. For if the right people do not have the power, do you know who has the power? The wrong people. The masses. We have it in our system that we have elections every 5 years, and the rest of the time it can be left in the hands of those that actually know how to run the country. Those with education in the classics, those in the civil servants. Hey. Mr. Wilson, again you went back to the Greeks, but as I've already gone over, the key phrase related to the Greeks in classical literature is actually Latin, because it would not make sense for the Greeks to beware of them giving gifts themselves. And also, if you look at the grammatical connotations, it isn't actually Greek grammar, but it is actually Latin grammar, despite the similarities in them.
On that point.
No. Give me a second here, old chap, give me a second. I am trying to mount a case. A member of high society never takes the point of the mass. Indeed, as we go back to the classics, they are classist, as they should be. Because without this classist embodiment of the classics, The wrong people will be in charge of the culture. And if the wrong people are in charge of the culture, there will be no culture. So indeed, the culture is maintained and appreciated by the right sort of gentry, the right sort of people to take control of the country.
On that point,
Yes?
thank you, Mr. Habib, but is the content not inherently not classic? Like, look at A Christmas Carol and the fact that it actively promotes altruism.
I have one response to this. Si tasuis... give me a second. Si tasuis says... My tongue's died. Si tasuis says, philosophers man si says. If you'd kept your mouth shut, we might have thought you were clever. And indeed, if you had had your education in the classics, you would have known that, my dear sir, but unfortunately, I do not think you did. Unfortunately, I had to translate for everyone in this room, thus removing part of the spur and part of the appreciation, which, again, we go back to this, the right sort of people would have had due to their wonderful education in the classics. No, because tempora mutare in mentume cum illis. Times change and we must change with the times, and time is not with me currently, so I must move on, unfortunately. As much as I'd like to take the right honourable member's point, because, well, we return to it. We return to high culture. As I said, the foundation of our wonderful democratic system, our system of governance. They keep talking of the classics, and they keep talking of how they have all these themes, the themes for the right sort of person to appreciate. Themes which, as was so eloquently put in a point of information, must be there in order to have a true story. And so, they're there so that the right people, the proper people, the sort of person that knows what cutlery to use with fish, the sort of person that knows the right wine pairings, these sort of people can look upon the issues of society and know deeper appreciation of them, so that whenever they inevitably deal with the unfortunate nature of a democratic system trying to stop them from controlling and from ruling society as they should do, they can appreciate it better. And they can act on those issues in relation to, of course, proper government statistics. So, we'll return to this. They state it's not classist because of X, Y, Z, but we shall return to it. Ultimately, look at the consumer. And the main consumer of the classics is the right sort of person. And I keep returning to this because it really is the right sort of person. Indeed, this is the our democratic system. Mr. President, I would like to thank you very much for a most enjoyable outing this evening for this speech. Thank you for the House, and I'm sure you'll vote for the right sort of people.
So, the most important quote said tonight came from the mouth of Cormac. He said, classics themselves aren't inherently classist. So what the fuck are we doing here? Oh, God. God is dead and we've killed him. Right, let's start by dissecting the very essence of classics. These revered works of literature have been passed down through the ages like prized heirlooms, like my hairline, my glasses, and my lack of will to live. But are they truly as noble as they're made out to be? Or are they just the literary equivalent of old grandpa's tales full of embellishments and outdated morals? Now, in preparation for this, I was pointed to the Holy Trinity, the opus magnus of modern adaptations of absolutely high classical things. So, The Lion King is just a retelling of Hamlet. Call Me By Your Name is just a retelling of the Odyssey, and my favourite, with Brokeback Mountain, is just a retelling of Wuthering Heights. Now, the proposition have argued that they're classist because they're steeped in the prejudices and biases of their time. Well done, welcome to humanity. We've all done that. And to that I say, bravo, you've cracked it. Yeah, classics are often reflective of the societal norms of the hierarchies of their own eras, showcasing a world where the rich dine on caviar while the poor scrape on by crumbs. But does that make them inherently classist? No, it just makes them interesting. Or are they merely products of their time, like petrol bombs and disco fever? Dostoevsky. Oh, this is Misha's fault, blame her. That brooding Russian wordsmith probably had more angst than I did when I just left Mormonism. Man is sometimes extraordinarily passionately in love with smoking, he mused, probably while chain-smoking cigarettes and staring at a blank page. Classic, right? Well, hold on to your monocles, folks, because our next quote comes from none other than Solid Snake, the graphically voiced protagonist of the Metal Gear Solid series. War has changed. Deep. Who needs Dostoevsky when you have a genetically enhanced super soldier dropping truth bombs? But wait, there's more. Nietzsche, the mustachioed madman of philosophy who famously proclaimed that God is dead, cued the existential crisis and rise of atheism. Right? Wrong! That quote actually comes from none other than the epic space opera Mass Effect. Turns out, Shepard was busy saving the galaxy while Nietzsche was busy growing his mustache. And what's the punchline in all of this? Well, it's the philosophy... Hold up, brother, I'm talking. Hold up, go for it.
Do you understand the concept of time?
Do you understand that I don't want to be here? No one cares, especially me. Oh, right. We talked about classical literature earlier. We talked about Victorian England, and there were some great points touched on. Consider, if you will, the works of Jane Austen, the beloved chronicler of Regency England. In her novels, we find a world where the landed gentry dance at lavish balls, while the lower classes struggle to make ends meet. But does Austen celebrate this social divide, or does she critique it with a sharp wit and keen eye for irony? After all, who can forget Mr. Darcy's questionable demeanour and Elizabeth Bennet's scathing retorts? If that's not a subtle jab at classism, I don't know what is. And what about Charles Dickens? We've already mentioned him, the champion of the downtrodden and the dispossessed in Oliver Twist and A Tale of Two Cities. Dickens exposes the harsh realities of poverty and inequality, painting a vivid portrait of a society divided by class. But far from glorifying the aristocracy, Dickens condemns their callous indifference to the suffering of the poor, urging his readers to empathise with the less unfortunate. But let us not rest in the laurels of the classics alone, for contemporary media offers its own brand of social commentary and philosophical insight. Take any celebrity ever. For example, the acclaimed television series The Wire, which explores the complexities of urban life and the systemic injustices that plague our society, or consider Black Mirror, where that's, oh my god, that's literally me. In the end, the question of whether classics are classist, it's not a simple one to answer, it's incredibly simple. No, they're fucking not. Thank you.
We'll move on to questions, but before we do, can I first apologise to the English Society for the last two speeches?
Don't leave last two, come on.
No, we'll move on to questions. So we'll go to a proposition question first, then an opposition question, then an abstention question, which must be put fairly to both sides. So just firstly, does anyone have a question for the proposition? Mr. Warren?
Can we actually get a consistent answer of how the prop defines Is it subject matter or the demography of the consumer?
Proposition? You could whisper out loud and answer this question. Proposition.
Well, I think it was a funny quip that's going to be said. But that's not. So we'll just simplify it. Demography, because as I went back, the right sort of people.
Opposition to respond.
I have no argument to the man classist.
That worked. Quiet, please. Can we have a question for the opposition?
Oh, yes.
Genius himself.
You could buy maybe like 2 of you could do 3 books, and like 1 of you could do 4 books. But can you name 10 classical books?
Opposition.
Opposition. Probably.
Are we actually giving you 10 books?
Yeah. Or you let the class.
Opposition.
I couldn't emphasize enough. No. I don't want to.
Well, luckily you're not the only one on the opposition, Noah.
Come on.
Okay.
What is the last? What's the point of all you've read? What's the last book?
Quiet, please. Proposition to respond, seeing as the opposition clearly cannot.
Pride and Prejudice with zombies.
That's a Pride and Prejudice.
I know it actually is a thing.
We'll take that as an answer and move on. Do we have any abstention questions? You know what, we'll do 2. We'll go Max first.
Both sides list the book, well, classical book that they feel sort of signifies their argument tonight.
Okay, proposition first.
I think the obvious one's probably, sorry James, something like Bright said because this is the noise James.
Opposition.
What are you doing? I just answered fast.
You read a book. Mine I didn't get to, so I can't say that.
A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll go next to James's abstention question.
I'd like to know what is the last book everyone on this debate has actually read and explain the plot in 1 sentence or less.
Proposition.
I only read
Last book.
the last book you've read could be, I don't know,
That's the last one I read was Losing Small Wars by Frank Woodridge, which military fellows in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I will accept more than one answer from each side if you wish to answer the question.
Jack, you're actually really.
Really?
It's
about self-discovery.
Quiet, please.
I'm not going to spoil it. I finished like 2 weeks ago, so I make jobs in Paris. And for a reason, very much reading networks, which is like getting hand jobs in Cambridge University.
Lovely. Opposition to respond?
The last book I read was Free of Mind by Stephen Hassan.
Oh, we're on.
That sounds like a very new book.
I can accept more than one answer.
Okay. Mine was The Martian.
Oh, you mean Swim in the Ponds in the Rain, George Saunders.
Basically, an essay masterclass of how to do creative writing.
Perfect. Thank you. I won't go round. I won't go round for another round of questions because the most important member, Mr. Noah Barnley, calendar must be filled with all sorts of engagements, as he doesn't want to be here. So we'll move on to the vote on speaker ability, which is not on what side you agree with, but who spoke the best and who were the most convincing. If you'd like to vote for the proposition, please raise your hand now.
We've got a few more.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, civil service.
If you'd like to vote for the opposition, please raise your hand now. Yeah. And if you'd like to abstain on the motion, please raise your hand now. Shame. Yeah. Can we get the vote on speaker ability, please?
On the exceptionally high turnout, there were 9 votes for the proposition, 8 for the opposition, and 5 abstentions. So by probably usual formality out to room margin, until they find a round ballot box, the proposition has it.
Thank you. There is no debate next week. We take the 1 week off for Easter, and then we're back the following week. Thank you very much to everyone who came to Conversazione. I hope you all enjoyed it. I certainly did. And in particular, I hope you all enjoyed the free wine that the Society so generously delivered via our treasurer. All the pictures from Conversazione are available. Just message the Instagram page and we'll send you the ones with you in it or the folder if I can't be bothered picking them out. But yeah, nothing next week, but keep an eye out for our announcement of our annual general meeting, which will be announced next week, and you'll have the chance to run for the next council of the Literific. But keep an eye on that and start considering which positions, if any, you would like to run for. But that'll be announced next week. Can we get all speakers to the front for a photo? Thank you very much.